All the way from Bokota village in Limpopo, South Africa, we bring you Missionary Minds, where you can learn about family, church history, biblical worldview issues, and of course, missions, all from the mind of a real-world missionary of almost 20 years. And Buripo, we were in recent times on Family Fridays, we've been discussing children, and we spoke about how children are born inherently sinful, and we spoke about time being a valuable tool to invest with children. And now when on one of those occasions when you may be out with your kids and a child is acting up, or it's on a different occasion, do you always have to rebuke in private, or is it ever right to rebuke a child in public? Over to you, Mfundisi.
You know, we could also call this maybe missing ingredients in family worship or something like that, because family worship is so important. And one of the reasons it's important is that we're not just reading the Bible and singing a hymn and praying. While that's very important, it is also a great chance for the family to invest in each other, and the parents to rebuke their children publicly. We're going to talk about some of the benefits of that. And then also make sure that you're packing in lots of praise for your children. And that's the second part. Yes, I think there is a place for public rebuke. And one of the reasons for that is children are foolish. We often think of a foolish grin, a foolish mistake, a foolish comment, a foolish mistake. We attach that word foolish to a number of ideas. But Scripture attaches foolish to children. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. So, like stars cover the sky, a foolishness covers the heart of a child. And sometimes it's not as noticeable. Normally when they're at their cutest. It's kind of like how many months of the year have 28 days, all of them. And in the same way, how many stars are in the sky on a sunny day? Like, it's filled with stars. It's just you can't see them. And when the child is at his cutest and his happiest and his cleanest, and he's just taking a bath, and we are tempted to think he's not foolish at all. But the foolishness is still there. It's just not as obvious. So one of our responsibilities as parents is to admonish, to correct, to rebuke them. They are not naturally good. They are naturally sinful. And it's because Adam put it there. Original sin. Psalm 51, David says, "In sin did my mother conceive me." So that means that we are born in sin, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort for parents to rebuke their children. And one of the ways that they can do that is publicly, and we like to do it oftentimes during family worship. And we'll talk a few practical ways of how we do that and how parents can do that.
Yeah. Before we go on to that, I was just thinking as you were speaking that this is more the oddity rebuking in public. It's more the oddity in the Christian contexts I've come to learn from. But in the African setting, it is more the commonality where, I don't know, is that a real word, commonality?
Works for me. I think so.
It's a more common thing where parents will be looking for opportunities to embarrass their child in public and rebuke them, because that's part of the discipline tool I'm using. Could you speak to that a bit, and why we're even saying, public rebuke, why should people consider?
Yeah. Let's be really careful with the term public, because that can be used in the wrong way. I suppose there's a time, for a coach to rebuke his player publicly. I mean, I grew up playing sports, and that was what coaches did. It's like when you make a mistake, he doesn't pull you off to the side every time. But there's a way that he can do it to embarrass them. I remember there was a time when at our church, we've had money stolen so many times at our church, and there was a case where a girl used her foot to steal money, and we went up to the mountain to talk to the parents, and we just assumed that there would be no father there, and there wasn't. And we spoke to the mother, and she, a lot of times they don't do anything, they don't care, but she went to the totally other side, and she went to the tree to find a switch, to like publicly beat her. And no, you don't have to. She couldn't break off the branch, so she found a hanger and she started beating her daughter there. Okay, that's not what we're after. We're not after that kind of public rebuke. But there is, so keep that in mind. Make sure that you don't embarrass. Don't be counterproductive in what you're trying to do. Just like church discipline. The purpose of church discipline is not blunt force trauma. It's restoration. Well, it's two things. It's to protect the flock, and then ultimately you want restoration. So that's why Scripture lays out very clear principles of how to carry out church discipline. And eventually it will become public. But first it's private, right? And then you go to 2 or 3, and then you take it to the elders, you take it to the church. Or Galatians 6:1, it talks about in the spirit of gentleness, rebuke the other person. So there's a right and wrong way to rebuke. We should bring all of the wisdom in church discipline, all the wisdom of Proverbs, and bring it into to bear when we are rebuking our children. So don't do it unbiblically, but there is a place, I think, for the public rebuke of children.
Yeah. As we're about to dive into that, I just have to go down this rabbit trail a bit. In your book on John Payton, missionary to the cannibal of the South Seas, he captures a point where he's ministering to a people group, and he says how they can be speaking to you and looking you in the eye and speaking to you,
grabbing with their toes.
Yeah, grabbing with their toes.
Yes,
So
we've seen that. Yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah. So okay, let's get back to this. So then, how do we start? How should we start thinking about this public rebuke, family worship? Okay,
so even before we get to public rebuke, just realize, parent, at the beginning, rebuke and error on the side of your children is not abnormal. Like, what are we doing wrong? It's like Adam put it there. I think of Proverbs 13:1, a wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. So it's just assuming that there's going to be rebuke. So expect error, sin from your children. My wife and I have often said 90% of what our children do is wrong, at least in their very early years. So we should just expect it. And that's actually one reason why so many millennials are having dogs. Because, you can throw newspaper on the ground, and that's the extent of, your issues with the dog. But that doesn't work as well with kids. You can't just throw newspapers on the ground for a kid. It takes a lot more effort and work. So with that in mind, with that kind of baseline, let's talk about different kinds of foolishness, because not all foolishness is created equal. You might say there's immoral and moral foolishness, or you could maybe call it unrighteous and righteous foolishness, if we could put it that way. So let's just talk about the immoral foolishness or unrighteous foolishness, and that would be sin, essentially. That's your son speaking back to his mother. That's your daughter lying. It is straight up sin. That's the kind of foolishness that's the most serious. That's the one that we discipline the firmest. That's the one that we take our Bible and address and we're most vigilant about. But then there's another kind of foolishness. We might call it moral foolishness. We might call it righteous foolishness. And that is, it's not necessarily sin. We might call it immaturity. We might call it indiscretion. We might call it thoughtlessness. And I have to say, this category it's not always an easy call. And that's why 2 wheels on the bike are so important. Mother and father are so important, because it's, when you're at an athletic event and the umpires come together to convene, or the referees come together, like, let's talk about this. That is my wife and I all the time. We see a particular situation, and then we say, pause, put on the headset, convene. We feel like referees. And my wife will say, I think this. And I come back and I say, I think this. Okay, there's no instant replay. So you have to come together with wisdom, which means I think so-and-so, it was deliberate. It was rebellion. And I might come back and say, I don't think they were legitimately trying to do wrong there. I think they were just an 8-year-old. I don't think it was sin. That's not an easy call, but it's important to make that distinction. It's important to make that call because you want to punish sin as sin. You broke God's law. Here's where you broke God's law. This is why you'll be disciplined. So let me give some examples of righteous foolishness, if I can put it that way, moral. They use their violin bow as a Robin Hood and a bow and arrow, or they're playing the trumpet on the tailpipe of the truck, or they run around foolishly, or so-and-so draws on the walls. Now, even that's a tough call because oftentimes drawing on the walls can be sinful because you told them multiple times beforehand, they still did it. It was out of rebellion. That could be in the category. But the first category, they might not know. They might not know that sticking Legos up each one of their nostrils during dinner time is a foolish thing to do.
These seem like really specific examples.
I've never experienced these before. I just heard about them from other people. My children would never do this. So, and the interesting thing is, you look back and oftentimes it's the second category that you laugh about. You don't laugh. You don't look back and say, remember how so-and-so used to be so rebellious towards. I remember how they used to lie all the time. You don't look back and laugh at that, but you do look back at that and say, remember when so-and-so asked if he could stand on the back ladder of the Land Rover as we were driving and we forgot about him back there, and we like half an hour later he was like a frozen piece of meat on the back. Like, those are the things that was foolishness. Like, I don't think it was sinful. He loved being back there. He didn't say anything because he knew his parents forgot about him. And of course, who those parents are, I don't know. But those are the things you look back on and are really some of the greatest memories. So be careful. Make sure you distinguish between those two kinds of foolishness.
Yeah, it makes me think of a time when I was young, and I don't remember much, but I have one distinct memory. My father asked me if I could go and get him a glass of water. And my little brain, working with associations of where I've seen water come out of, I was like, when you flush the toilet, water comes out of it. So I went and I got a glass and flushed the toilet. Thankfully, he asked me where I got the water before he drank it.
Because of the items floating inside.
Before we move on to the next section, could you speak to us a bit about discernment when it comes to these issues? Because you mentioned how sometimes a sort of righteous foolishness and ignorance, as it were, can still have rebellion linked to it. And sometimes a kid is putting a Lego up their brother or sister's nose because they want to hurt their brother or sister, or they're trying to test you or something. So discernment in those areas.
I would just say a wisdom call. You have to trace it back to, are they disobeying? Obey all the way, right away, and with a good attitude every day. Like, that's one of our chants that we say. So are they breaking a principle that was found in Scripture that we've stated in our home? Are they breaking a family rule? So yeah, I can see some situations where in other families it wouldn't be anything wrong, but in our family, we've made it very clear that you have to be up, for an example, at a certain time, or you have the responsibility for caring for your sisters in this particular way. And if you don't do it, then you're breaking the rules. So I think it's just a wisdom.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything special around that. It's just, you're going to face hundreds of wisdom calls. How many times do two kids come to me? I'm in my study and they come running, and I feel like Solomon so often, cut the baby in half. I'm not sure what to do. I mean, that is a major role of a father, putting out fires. And I tell my wife all the time, if you have problems, you bring them to me. I'll take care of it. I've got the strength. I can discernment. So they'll come to me, and I hear two sides. And that's why it's so important for fathers to be walking in the Spirit and to have wisdom. And he hears it, and he's got to make a call. I mean, he wasn't there. And oftentimes I say, one of you are lying. Like, it is impossible for these stories. This is not the book of Mark and Matthew that they can, it's the synoptics here. Like, they are saying opposite things. And then you bring to bear, I know the character of so-and-so. As compared to this person, you make a decision. Or this story doesn't make sense. Or bring in a third party or bring in mama and hear what she has to say. Or, you know what? I'm not sure, so I'm not going to lay down any judgment here, but just don't do it. I mean, that happens dozens of times. I'm tempted to say a day. And you're putting out these fires, and you need the wisdom of the Lord to do the best that you can. I don't think there's any exact formula.
Yeah.
I would just say wisdom.
But that's even helpful for the parents who may be tempted because of their individual composition to lean too heavily on firm rebuke, or to lean too heavily on, let's just laugh at it. It's just righteous foolishness.
Again, well, that's why it's so important with the two parents, because they balance each other out. In some ways, I'm the softie in our home, and Mama's the harder one. In other ways, she's the softie. And believe me, children, they will discern those very quickly, and they will lean. Okay, when I want such and such, I'm going to Father. I want to go to such and I'm going to Mama. So that's why it's very important for the mother and father to be united. If you disagree, do your disagreements behind closed doors. Learn from the NFL. When they go to the instant replay, they go in that tent, right? And they cover themselves, and they go, and then they confer. Don't disagree publicly as much as possible. Make sure that you have a united front in front of your children. Otherwise, they're gonna figure out how to divide you.
Yeah. Okay, as we move on, what's the father's role in all of this? How involved should he be? Any principles on that?
The father, I think, should be the primary disciplinarian of the home, if as much as possible. And there is a time that a father should do it privately, a time that the father should do it publicly. Here's some times that I think publicly it should be done, probably in family worship. And I think there's some benefits to that. We even see many times in the Old Testament prophets publicly rebuking the people. Of course, there's individual times. So let's go to Saul, for example. Let's go to David, for example. And that's a private. Nathan rebuked David privately, but how often are they rebuking the people publicly? The goal is not to embarrass them, but the goal is to bring them to repentance. And so I think there is some benefits of group rebuke. Let me give a few of them. One would be that the younger ones can learn from the older ones. So again, you're not doing it to embarrass them, but you're speaking as a group, and you're saying, so-and-so, I've noticed this time and time again. You've made this mistake. You cannot do this if you want to be successful in life. And the younger ones are hearing that. Or you might rebuke the younger ones. You say, how can the older ones learn from the younger ones? Because now you're teaching them parenting. I always think about this with our youngest. She is a year and a half. And we were gathering for a talk, or we're having a game or something, and the baby acts up and she deliberately disobeys, and we're all comfortable. We're sitting deeply into the sofa. We feel like we're 2 meters into the sofa and we don't want to leave. And yet my wife and I will look at each other and we'll say, we've got to get up and address this. Now, what can our oldest learn from this? She's learning mothering. She's learning how to handle this. If we let that go, then they're going to say that's going to be fine. So we're really modeling parenting, in a sense, to our children publicly when we do a public rebuke. So that's one of the benefits. You're also learning how to do it tactfully when you're you're rebuking them. Again, you're not trying to embarrass them. It's also a means of accountability. Here's the little sinner in the family that's kind of doing their own thing. And it's not uncommon for the children to come and say, you've really got to address so-and-so. And that's helpful. I don't think they're always tattling. They just see things that I don't see. So-and-so is doing this constantly and it's not being addressed. And I say, I'll tell you what, I will address it publicly tonight. And what that does is it cuts off unwarranted tattling to me, because they're not going to, if they know it's going to be publicly addressed, they're not going to tattle about dishonest or worthless things. But they'll say, okay, if it's legit, okay, good. Address it publicly, and I'll stand by what I'm saying. So it kind of keeps the little sinner accountable. And then it also gives mother a break. She's with the kids most of the day. She's in many ways doing most of the discipline. Now she says, thankfully, yes, I've got someone on my side. They're coming in and they're coming down. They're saying the exact same thing I am. Isn't that what families love? The preacher, they love it when the preacher is saying the same thing to their kids that they're saying in the home, and they can say to their kids, see, the pastor said the same thing we're doing. They love that kind of support. That's kind of what the father is doing. Everything's out in the open. Eliminating confusion, he said, she said, and the multitude of witnesses. In the multitude of the counselors, much safety. Don't accept a rebuke except in the openness of 2 or 3 witnesses. That's the idea. You're using that principle. Here we are, gathered together as a family. Now, we're going to do this in another program, but if you're going to do that, make sure you do it a lot, even more with praise.
Yeah.
Heap it with praise. We're starting with rebuke, but really praise should be double. But yes, make sure that you have rebuke. A time, let's take a walk. I've noticed this. You need to address it. But there is a time for reams of rebuke publicly. And really, in the long run, it might even make it less common in your home. We like to say in our home, laziness means more work in the long run. Procrastination is more work in the long run. If you're not getting things done now, it's not like you can skip it. You will do it. It's just going to be more work. And it's the same thing with rebuking. If you don't rebuke and deal with it now, when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's just going to be more headaches, more heartache, more work in the long run. Do it when they're early. Do it publicly. One person made an infraction. Rebuke that to that person, but do it with every other ear listening. So in a sense, you're doubling, tripling, quadrupling your work. And in the long run, I think it'll be easier for you.
Yeah. And it helps when you quadruple your work, because with 8 kids, there's a lot to get around to.
Yes. I didn't know how to say 8, though. How do you say 8? Quadruple 4? I mean...
Octupling. I don't know. Before we wrap it up, I just have one more question. So we've spoken about immoral foolishness and a sort of righteous foolishness, sinful and non-sinful, and there are kind of different levels to that. And just like someone who's using different tools for different things, you have a certain screwdriver for a watch and you're very delicate with it. Then when you're tightening the doorknob, you're also using something different from that, or you're using a power tool to undo the nut on a wheel, and you don't use them all the same. So if we think, I've seen you use different tools, like, hey, maybe there's a time when you say, okay, you need to go to the bedroom or the bathroom and get a reminder right now. So that's, let's say, the strongest. And then there's another time when you use a very firm word where everyone just thinks, okay, that person's getting a very firm word to remind them. Then there are other times where it'll just be like, hey man, don't do that. You know you're not supposed to be doing that. So can you speak to us a bit about how you discern when to use which screwdriver and tool to deal with which situation?
I can think of a couple examples. One would be they leave the gate open and the baby walks out on the main road. I mean, that would be, let's say they left the gate open and they didn't do it purposefully. It was just thoughtless. That's a really serious non-sinful, foolish mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to come down on that. Like that could bring death.
Yeah.
And mama's not going to be happy about that. So you really come down hard on that. Or another example, I remember a couple of years ago, we went climbing on these humongous rocks and mountains. And I was going to walk up with all the kids and kind of lead them up. And then you get on the top of these boulders where you're thousands of feet in the air and you look down, you have kind of young kids with you. And something happened where I had to stop to address something, and all of the kids went forward and went to the top of the mountain. So here they are with my little kids up top, and like I gave them a Bobby Knight dressing down, serious. And even there, I recognize that it wasn't sinful, but it could have been a very costly mistake. And I don't think they ever forgot that. And I don't think they're going to make that mistake again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the idea.
Yeah.
If it's something of, spilling a drink, like your kids can't be afraid. You've got to let them know when you knock over a cup, don't be angry. In fact, sometimes we even, laugh at that. Like that happens. You're going to trip and you're learning how to walk and you fall over and you break your violin bow and all of those things. So make sure the closer it is to breaking a principle of wisdom in Proverbs, the more severe the discipline is going to be. The further away it is from a character principle in Proverbs, the less severe you're going to be.
That's helpful. What a treat, Mfundisi. To our audience, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to rate it and subscribe to keep posted with more upcoming content. Feel free to share this episode with someone who might find it interesting and submit any questions you may want answered in a future podcast. You can email those questions to paulschleierlein@gmail.com. You can also visit betweentwocultures.com for other resources like this. I'm your host, Yamikani Katunga, and until next time, that's it from Missionary Minds.